Lewis, Elephant Journal and Walk the Talk Show, and I'm very honored to be here with Governor Dr. Howard Dean. This is a tougher interview than usual for me because I actually, ironically, really care about this interview. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
You really galvanized, really at least our half of the nation, and kind of re-inspired us. I want to get involved in politics, in public service in any way. You really, you made government accessible, and with the sort of grassroots fundraising, kind of took the corporations and the money out of big politics.
Well, temporarily anyway.
Temporarily, yeah. So that would be my first question, is it's obviously gone the opposite direction again, giving corporations the right to directly contribute to campaigns. And that seems to be, to me, one of the roots of the problems in our
It is. I mean, look, the right has complained about judicial activism for years, but we have 4 super right-wing judicial activists on the Supreme Court, 1 genuine conservative, which is Anthony Kennedy, and then 4 people who actually care what's in the Constitution. I think one of the reasons I'm supporting President Obama for re-election is because I think his first 2 Supreme Court nominations were terrific. They won't be perfect. Some people will criticize him for this or that, but they're thoughtful, smart people who actually care what's in the Constitution. And I'd like to see the president get a chance to name 2 or 3 more people like that.
Yeah, and there was that great moment in the State of the Union when he kind of directly addressed the Supreme Court justices.
As he should have. The Supreme Court has been politicized by a 30-year effort by the far right, the Federalist Society and others, to get to an ideological agenda. They now seek to write the law and not to read the law. The Citizens United case was a travesty. There's nowhere in the Constitution does it say a corporation has a right, the same rights a person does. And the Bush-Gore case was an atrocity. I mean, to stop a vote count on some flimsy constitutional grounds is hocus pocus. They don't have a role in this election of the President of the United States. That's left to Congress if there's a deadlock. Right. So these are 2 of the most embarrassing, disgraceful court decisions in the history of the Republic, and they undermine the future of the Republic. And we need a thoughtful, middle-of-the-road president who actually happens to be a constitutional scholar to start making appointments. And as I said before, I think these first 2 are very, very good, and I'd like to see the next 2 or 3.
For those of us who haven't thought about it that much, why is it so dangerous to have corporations have really direct influence in campaigns?
Because in a democracy, you have a democracy is meant to be a balance between the interests of the powerful and the interests of the people who make the powerful powerful. So if you want to do a sort of economic analysis about it, I happen to be a capitalist. I think capitalism is a successful system, and it's not without its warts. It takes advantage of not very nice traits of human nature, greed, to help us become actually productive. The problem with capitalism, if it's not regulated, it's like football without a referee. And the people who actually create the wealth on the factory floor are being left behind. And so by giving all this power to corporations, you're leaving them further behind. The opposite is necessary. This country, the biggest danger in this country today is the fact that the gap between the CEO and the person on the factory floor is 500 times. That's not sustainable with a political system that's going to continue to work. In the 50s, it was 50 times.
Right.
Now, we can argue about what it is. I have no problem with the CEO making more money than the average guy. But when it gets too big, whatever too big is, and I think 500 times is too big, you endanger the system, because fundamentally, in the last 20 years, all the economic growth has gone to the top 20%. And the top 1% has doubled the amount of America that they own. Now, again, I'm not against rich people, and most people in America are not against rich people. They'd like to be rich themselves someday. But when the system stops working for 80% of the public, the system is doomed. And I think the system works. This is a great country. It needs to be saved from itself. It's got irresponsible leadership, not in the business community, but in the financial community. And they got to be reined in, and it has to be international regulations too, because this is an international problem, not just an American problem.
I want to touch quickly on healthcare, which I know you're an expert in. Going back to Vermont, I went to high school in Vermont.
Did you?
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
St. Johnsbury.
Oh my goodness.
St. Academy. Yeah.
Very conservative, but an excellent school.
Yeah, very conservative in the old-fashioned sense.
Libertarian, that's right.
One of my best teachers, who's now the the principal or whatever, the head of it, Thomas Levitt, he said, that classic line, we want to teach you how to think, not
right.
what to think. And it was that kind of school. I think just after I graduated in 91, secured health care for all children below 18. Below.
Yep.
Why is it so important for all people, rich people, poor people, that we're really protecting the most vulnerable in our society?
Well, it's not so much just protecting the most vulnerable. It's there is in a wealthy democracy, there is a standard of living below which nobody should fall, especially people who are working. I saw a ridiculous guy who should know better write a book the other day, and among the prescriptions for making America stronger was to get rid of the minimum wage. Now, I just shut the book, and it's going to go into the recycling pile. That's ridiculous. You have to have a minimum wage. Because if people are willing to work and work hard, they have to at least be guaranteed that they're going to make a reasonable living and be able to support their kids and hope that their kids can do better than they do.
That's the American dream.
Well, it is the American dream, and it's how capitalism works. Yeah. Capitalism's like every other system. If you don't pay attention to it, it falls apart of its own. It collapses in and out of itself. And so the reason I think things like universal health care are important, universal public education is important, is because it provides a floor below which a human being cannot fall. And I think that's important.
You're here at Naropa University today. I also grew up here in Boulder, and my mom taught here, and I've been very involved in Naropa. I'm curious, what are you're talking to, of course, the graduating class. What is your message for them?
It's actually about sustainability, although sustainability is kind of the theme, but the real underlying message is actually not that much different than the campaign, is that you have the power to change things. And you do it first in your own life, and then you do it in your society, maybe in your town. And that change, especially in this younger generation, is going to come from the bottom up, principally because the internet empowers people in ways that they haven't been empowered. And just a huge step forward. The last huge step like this was the invention of the printing press 500 years ago.
Sure.
So
it's radical.
Yeah, it's radical, this internet. And the interesting thing is the convergence in the under 35 generation. There is a relationship in the way people think. It's not the same, but it's a relationship in Tahrir Square, in Tehran, in Beijing, in the United States.
You saw it organized through Twitter and Facebook.
Absolutely. It's an amazing thing. Authoritarian governments ought to be quaking in their boots, because you can't overcome this no matter how much force you use, as the Ayatollahs will find out.
Yeah, it's funny, the New York Times coverage following the killing of Osama bin Laden. What was so interesting, they talked about how his whole relevance had been already eclipsed by Egypt, and his relevance in the Muslim world.
Yeah, I think getting Osama bin Laden was a good thing for our country, because it shows that we do have the ability to bring people like that to justice, and that we won't stop. But as far as the operations of Al Qaeda go, I think they were already in trouble, and they're going to continue to be in trouble. Yeah. But the most telling thing about the murder of Osama bin Laden is that Egyptians, only 22% of them supported him. That was down dramatically, where the majority of people supported him 10 years ago, and that's because they were also the victims of his violence. And violence eventually outruns itself, because everybody understands that they could be the next victim. Eventually, the populism is your favor of it because somebody else is getting it. Then sooner or later it gets turned on you if you live in a violent society, and that's what basically bin Laden was preaching, was a violent society.
Yeah, and like you said, the Egyptians and many others had seen that through democracy they could achieve the kind of society they wanted.
Right, although I think we have to be sanguine about it. I think the Egyptians are not going to end up with what we would call a democracy. My guess is that they'll end up with an elected government. They'll hopefully actually have free elections, but that the military will circumscribe what they can do, because the military has a big piece of that economy. That's going to be a problem, because ultimately that's not stable either, because what you really need in Egypt, where they have 80 million people and about 60 million of them live on $2 a day, you're going to have jobs, and the only thing you can do to create jobs is to loosen the system a little bit and have some competition and so forth and so on.
So for those of us who were involved in 2004, inspired by your leadership, I think we're all curious, after the DNC and the 50-state strategy that was so successful and controversial, What's up next?
Well, I'm doing a lot of different things. I travel a lot in other countries. I'm involved with getting a group of Iranian dissidents off the American terrorist list. They're not terrorists, they were put on there for political reasons, and they're already off. We got them off the European list and the UK list because they're getting murdered by Maliki, and they're unarmed. We promised that we would protect them, and we haven't. So that's 3,400 lives. It would be nice to save some of them. I'm very involved in doing democracy building work mostly in southeastern Europe, Albania, Bosnia, and so forth, Kosovo. And at home, I still continue to support progressive candidates wherever I can.
Yeah, it's one thing I was curious about is, that was part of your campaign, you really wanted to support a lot of other candidates, not just yourself. There seems to be a need almost for some sort of institute or college or something to train and nurture young candidates.
Well, as you mentioned, there is such a thing. My brother still runs what's left of my campaign. It's called Democracy for America. You can go on the web, democracyforamerica.com, and they actually do trainings. They do trainings, they do about 30 trainings a year from Oregon to Maine. And they train candidates, they train political staff, they recruit candidates, they support candidates at the local level, which is great, and of course some Congress people as well. So that actually does exist. And the nice thing is that because of the healthcare fight, they're now working very closely with a lot of the other progressive organizations around the country, like Move On and Progressive Democrats and Progressive Congressional Majority and so forth.
So I and others who want to get involved in public service can go check out the website?
Yeah, DFA, go to DFA, the democracyforamerica.com website.
Great. Well, thank you.
Free advertisement for DFA.
I like it. And then, I guess a final question, maybe about 2012, is, Boulder's full of, you used to talk about being what was it?
The Democratic wing of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, so we have a lot of very liberal citizens here who love to criticize Obama, and while a lot of that's valid, we tend to shoot ourselves in the foot and not play like a team. Do you feel like we all need to get on board and support Obama?
Well, look, I think at the end of the day, you have one vote. Who are you going to... Are there some things I disagree with Obama on? Sure. Of course there are. Yeah. But at the end of the day, we have a choice between Obama and somebody in the far right who's going to wreck the country. So it's pretty open and shut case to me. Look, I still think that there's well, let me back up for a second. When I was governor, I didn't always please my left. In fact, most of the time I made them mad. Right. There's some pragmatic things about governing that you have to do, whether you like it or not. Closing Gitmo. I thought Gitmo should have never been open. I thought it should be closed. But I understand why the president can't close it. Because
he's tried, right?
Yeah, he has tried, and basically the CIA has told him, I think, that if you let these people out, A, they're going to be back in jihad again, and that's true if 30% of the people have gotten out, and B, it'll compromise our security and our ability to protect the United States. So now what do you do? So look, I'm not defending Gitmo. It was we never should have opened it. Sure. But once it's open, now you've got a problem. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that, when you're not in the seat, it's easy to be critical because Gitmo is not a good thing for the country. No. But there are a lot of things like that. So look, am I pretty happy with President Obama? Yeah, I am. I don't think healthcare was done right. I think it was a lot of mistakes there. Some of that was his staff.
But a step forward?
It is a step forward. Oddly enough, it's very much patterned after Romney's bill in Massachusetts, and Romney's bill has turned out to be a big step forward in Massachusetts. They need a lot of work. They haven't tackled the biggest problem of all, which is costs. Nobody's tackled that one, and that's going to have to be tackled.
And we spend something like 6 times the amount of other...
Yeah, I mean, it's not 6 times, but it's about 70% more than the next most expensive as a percentage of GNP. But anyway, the bottom line is, at the end of the day, if you care about the country, I think you got to vote for Obama, because the alternative is unthinkable. We are making progress in the right direction here, and if somebody else gets in there, we're going to be making progress in a direction I think is going to be very bad for the country.
All right. Well, Governor Dane, thanks for coming to Naropa.
Thank you.
It's an honor.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.